Hello everyone! If you haven't watched part 1 of the Enchanted Castle story, watch it now. Link is in the description box. Hope you'll enjoy it. Chapter 7. The thing was alive, and was asking a definite and a reasonable question. You want a hotel? Gerald repeated stupidly. A good hotel, said the painted lips. I'm awfully sorry, Gerald went on politely, but all our hotels shut so early, about 8, I think. Knock them up, said the ugly wuggly. Gerald even now does not understand how that creature made of clothes could become a perfectly respectable person, about 50 years old, the kind of man who travels first class and smokes expensive cigars. You can't, Gerald explained. They're all deaf, every person who keeps a hotel in this town. It's a law. Only deaf people are allowed to keep hotels. It's because of the hops in the beer, they are so good for earache. The other ugly wugglies were crowding round. The lady in a tall hat said, "If not a hotel, a room." I do know rooms, said Gerald, but the lady ugly wuggly in the hat with flowers interrupted him. What I want to know, she said, is where are the carriages we ordered? I don't know, said Gerald, but I'll find out. But we must go now, he added. You see, the performance is over, and they want to shut up the house and turn off the light. Let's go. The ugly wugglies went towards the front door. I'll try to do anything, of course, said Gerald. I could go with you, and get you a lodging, if you'd only wait a few moments in the yard. You see, I've got an uncle who's quite mad, and I have to give him his gruel at 9:30. He refuses to eat out of any hand but mine. Gerald did not mind what he said. You can tell lies to the ugly wugglies, because they are not real people and cannot be really deceived. Gerald went through the back door, down the steps into the yard, and the ugly wugglies followed him. Some of them had boots, but the ones whose feet were only broomsticks or umbrellas had problems with the stairs. Please wait under the balcony, said Gerald. My uncle is very mad. If he sees any strangers, I mean, even aristocratic ones, I won't answer for the consequences. Perhaps, said the lady in the hat with flowers nervously, we could try to find rooms ourselves? I don't recommend it to you, said Gerald as gloomily as he could. The police here arrest all strangers. It's the new law. I wouldn't like to see you in prison, he added convincingly. The ugly wugglies gathered under the balcony. Gerald went up the stairs. Behind him in the yard there were 7 impossible creatures. Before him in the silent house there were 5 frightened people. Of course the reason why Gerald was not afraid was that he had the ring, and, as you have seen, the person who wears it is not frightened by anything unless he touches that thing. But Gerald knew well enough how the others must feel. Kathy! I say! Jimmy! Mabel! He cried in a loud, cheerful voice that sounded very unreal to himself. The dining room door opened. Are you alone? Whispered Kathleen. Yes, of course. Where are they? Have you unwished them? We heard them talking. Horrible, they're in the yard, said Gerald with the best imitation of excitement that he could manage. It is such fun. They're just like real people, quite kind and jolly. Look here, Kathleen and Jimmy must go to bed, and I'll take Mabel home. I must find some place where the ugly wugglies could stay. Now I'll speak to Mademoiselle and Eliza. He put on his coat as he spoke and now ran up the stairs. The others, gathered in the hall, could hear his knock at Mademoiselle's door, His words, "It's only me, Gerald," the pause, the opening of the door, and the talk that followed. Then Mademoiselle and Gerald went to Eliza's door, trying to calm her down. "I wonder what lies he's telling them," said Jimmy. "Oh. Not lies," said Mabel. "He's only telling them as much of the truth as it's good for them to know. I'm so sorry you were frightened," Gerald was saying. "It was a good trick, wasn't it?" "Well, so it was," said Mabel. "It was indeed a wonderful trick," said Mademoiselle. "And how did you move the figures?" "Oh, we've often done it with strings, you know," Gerald explained. "That's true, too," Kathleen whispered. "Can you do this remarkable trick again?" asked Mademoiselle. "Oh, I've cleared them all out," said Gerald. "So he has," said Kathleen to Jimmy. "We thought you wouldn't like to see them again." Mademoiselle entered the dining room and saw that the figures had indeed disappeared. Then Gerald explained to her that it was his duty to escort Mabel home. The moment that front door was shut, Gerald led Mabel to the corner of the side street which led to the yard. Just round the corner he stopped. "Now," he said, "what I want to know is, are you an idiot or aren't you, idiot yourself?" said Mabel mechanically. "I'm not frightened of the ugly wugglies. They're harmless. But an idiot might be frightened and give the whole show away." "I'm not an idiot," said Mabel, terribly frightened. "I'm not afraid of anything." "Mabel," said Gerald, in low, thrilling tones, for he saw that the time had come to sound another note, "I know you're brave. I believe in you. That's why I've arranged it like this. I'm certain you've got the heart of a lion. Can I trust you?" Mabel felt that to say anything but yes was to throw away a priceless reputation for courage. So she said yes. "Then wait here. And when you see me with them, remember they're as harmless as snakes, I mean doves. Talk to them just like you would to anyone else. See?" He turned to leave her, but stopped at her natural question. "What hotel did you say you were going to take them to?" "Oh," said Gerald, hands. "I forgot. I wanted to ask you, are there any rooms or anything in the castle where I could put them for the night? The charm will break, you know, some time, and they'll just be coats and things that we can easily carry home any day." "There's a secret passage," Mabel began, but at the moment the yard door opened and an ugly wuggly put out its head and looked down the street. "Righto." Gerald ran to meet it. Mabel's hands became cold and damp, but she stood, saying over and over again, "They're not true, they can't be true. It's only a dream." And then Gerald was there, and all the ugly wugglies crowding round, and Gerald saying, "This is one of our friends, Mabel, the princess in the play, you know." The ugly wuggly shook her hand and talked very nicely to her. Then they all walked up the high street as if, as Gerald said, they were anybody else. It was a very strange procession, but fortunately they met no one. Mabel decided to show Gerald that she was not an idiot. So she went on talking with these impossible people. Finally, the procession arrived at the gates of the castle. Locked, of course. "You see," explained Gerald, as the ugly wugglies shook the gates with his hands, "it's so very late. There is another way. But you have to climb through a hole." "The ladies," the respectable ugly wuggly began, but the ladies with one voice said that they loved adventures. "That's so thrilling," added the one who wore roses. So they went round by the road, climbed through the hole, and came through all passages and arches to the castle garden. The ugly wugglies looked at the garden and marble terraces in admiration. "This seems a very good hotel," said the ugly wuggly in a high hat. we will have to go in by the back door," said Mabel suddenly. "The front door's locked at 9:30. They went up the steps of the Temple of Flora. Mabel passed behind the statue of the goddess, and then Gerald's lantern showed a very high and very narrow doorway. The stone that was the door, and that had closed it, moved slowly under the touch of Mabel's fingers. "This way," she said, feeling very nervous. "You lead the way, with the lantern," said a small ugly wuggly to Gerald. I must stay behind to close the door," said Gerald. "The princess can do that." "We'll help her," said the lady with flowers. "You take it," insisted Gerald, giving the lantern to the elderly ugly wuggly. "You're the natural leader. Go straight ahead." The respectable ugly wuggly and the others disappeared into that narrow doorway. Gerald and Mabel almost sobbed with relief. But they didn't have time to close the door. Suddenly the ugly wugglies returned and tried to open it again. They could see something in the dark passage that alarmed them, or they took it into their empty heads that this could not be the back way to any really respectable hotel. Mabel and Gerald never knew. But they knew that the ugly wugglies were no longer polite and friendly. They were angrily shouting threats and trying to open the narrow stone door. "Push, push!" cried Gerald. "I can't any more. Oh, I can't!" moaned Mabel. "They mustn't get out!" shouted Gerald. "What's up, there?" cried suddenly a new voice, and a new shadow fell on the marble floor of the Temple of Flora. "Come and help push!" shouted Gerald. "If they get out, they'll kill us all." A strong shoulder pushed suddenly between the shoulders of Gerald and Mabel. The heavy, narrow door slowly closed, and the angry, threatening mass of ugly wugglies was shut in. The stranger looked at them and asked, "Who are you? And what's it all about?" "I can't possibly tell you," answered Gerald. "Come out into the moonlight and let's talk," said the man. The stranger led both children out from the temple into the bright white moonlight and sat down on the steps, a child on each side of him. He was clean-shaven, and had large eyes that sparkled when the moonlight touched them. He looked at the children and said in a friendly way, "Now then, go ahead." Mabel sobbed, but Gerald said, "If we told you the truth, you wouldn't believe it. Let me just put the thing from my point of view. I come down from London to take care of a big estate. On the very first evening I go out for a walk and approaching a white building, hear sounds of a scuffle, accompanied by cries for help. I do help and shut in someone who behind a stone door. Now, is it unreasonable to ask who it is that I've shut and helped to shut up, and who it is that I've helped?" "It's reasonable enough," agreed Gerald. "Well then," said the stranger. "No," said Gerald, "I simply can't tell you." "Then I must ask the other side," said the man. "Let me go, I'll open that door and find out for myself." "Tell him," said Mabel, speaking for the first time. "We can't let them out." "Very well," said Gerald, "I'll tell him." "Will you promise us that you won't tell anyone what we tell you, and that you won't put us in a lunatic asylum if you think that we are mad?" "Yes," said the stranger, "I think I can promise that." "Let me begin, then," said Mabel. "I found a ring, and I said it would make me invisible. I said it in play. And it did. I was invisible 21 hours. Don't ask where I got the ring. Now, Gerald, you go on." Gerald went on. He spoke for a long time. "And so," he ended, "we got them in there, and when 7 hours are over, or 14, or 21, or something with a 7 in it, they'll just be old coats again. They came alive at 9:30. I think they'll stop being it in 7 hours. That's 4:30. Now will you let us go home? I'll take you home, said the stranger in a kindly tone. Come, you don't believe us, said Gerald. Of course you don't. Nobody could. Come, and I'll take you home, said the man. Mabel lives at the Towers, said Gerald. I'm housekeeper's niece, said Mabel. The stranger took Mabel to the castle and went with Gerald to the door of the school. Look here, said Gerald. I know that you're going to open that door. Possibly, said the man. Well, don't. Or, anyway, wait till daylight and let us be there. We can get there at 10. All right, I'll meet you there at 10, answered the stranger. Good night. As the 4 children went towards the Temple of Flora, they talked, as they had talked all the morning, about the adventures of last night. It was not 10, but 12:30, because they had to clear up the mess in the dining room. I do hope he'll be there, Mabel said. He was such a dear, a real gentleman. He isn't there, though, said Jimmy. I believe you, it was just a dream. They went up the marble steps in the sunshine, and it was difficult to believe that it was the same place where Gerald and Mabel had been so frightened. Shall we open the door, suggested Kathleen, and begin to carry home the coats? Let's listen first, said Gerald. Perhaps they aren't only coats yet. They listened, but the passage behind the stone door was quiet. As they turned away, they saw the man they had come to meet. He was on the other side of Flora's pedestal. He lay there on his back, his arms flung wide. Oh, look, cried Kathy, and pointed. The stranger's face was almost green, and on his forehead there was a cut, and a little blood from it was on the marble floor. At the same time Mabel pointed too, but she did not cry as Kathy had done. And she pointed at a white painted paper face, with very red lips. In a moment the face disappeared in the bushes. Chapter 8. It was clear that the stranger had opened the door before the charm broke. The ugly wugglies were then something more than just coats and hats and sticks. So they had hit him on his forehead with some kind of stick. Jimmy and Gerald both knew what was the first thing needed by the unconscious man, even before Mabel impatiently said, "Water. Water." The 2 boys turned away. "And if they go after us?" asked Jimmy. "What go after us?" said Gerald sharply. "The ugly wugglies," Jimmy whispered. "Duh, I'll do it," said Gerald. He looked to right and left very carefully, and chose the way to the lake that did not lead near the bushes. He dropped his handkerchief into the water and returned to the Temple of Flora. It was with this that the girls wiped the blood from the man's forehead. "We need smelling salts," said Kathleen to Mabel. "Hasn't your aunt any?" "Yes, but don't be a coward," said Gerald. "They won't hurt you." There was no choice, so Mabel looked at the bushes and ran towards the castle. "He's not dead, is he?" asked Jimmy anxiously. "No," said Kathleen, "his heart's beating. How good-looking he is." Suddenly a shadow fell on the marble beside them and a voice said, "Quite a nice young man." The children looked up and saw the face of the respectable ugly wuggly. Jimmy and Kathleen screamed. Gerald was not frightened because he was wearing the magic ring. He looked into the face of the ugly wuggly and started. The face was no longer paper. It was a real face, and the hands were real hands. It was alive. "What happened?" asked Gerald. "The others lost their way in the passage last night," said the ugly wuggly. They never found the hotel, did you? Asked Gerald. Of course, said the Ugly Wuggly. Most respectable, exactly as you said. Then when I came away, I found the others all at this door, very angry. They'd been here all night, trying to get out. Then this gentleman opened the door, and that man in the high hat who has bad manners hit him on the head, and he fell where you see him. The others went away, and I myself was just going for help when I saw you. Jimmy was sobbing and Kathleen was white as drawing paper. What's the matter, my little man? Said the respectable Ugly Wuggly kindly. Here, take the ring, whispered Gerald and put it on Jimmy's finger. Jimmy stopped crying at once. And Gerald realized what it was that Mabel had gone through the night before. But it was daylight, and Gerald was not a coward. We must find the others, he said. You two go and see. I'll stay with the man. In the wood, Jimmy, now fearless as a lion, discovered the Ugly Wugglies. There was no life in them. Jimmy shook them to pieces. When Kathleen and Jimmy returned to the Temple of Flora, Gerald asked the elderly Ugly Wuggly to hide in the bushes with Jimmy. I think, said he, the man may be upset when he sees the strangers. So the two disappeared behind the bushes. Mabel came back with the salts, just as the stranger opened his eyes with the question, "What's up now?" "You've hurt your head," said Gerald. The man sat up, looked round him and said, "When did it happen? We don't know." "We found you like it," said Gerald. "I'm all right now," said the stranger, "thank you for the first aid." "But what an odd thing, what's an odd thing?" asked Gerald. "Well, I saw you just before I fainted, or whatever it was, but I had the most extraordinary dream while I was unconscious, and you were in it." "Only us?" asked Mabel. "Oh, many things, impossible things, but you were real enough." Everyone breathed deeply in relief. "I dreamed there was a door behind Flora's statue, but of course there isn't." "I don't know how to thank you," he added, looking at them with what the girls called his beautiful, kind eyes. "You come here when you like, you know." "I'll tell you what," said Gerald, as the stranger disappeared in the trees, "I think I know how we can spend the day. Let's go home and seal up the ring in an envelope so that it'll be powerless to do something horrible. Then we'll get out on the roof and have a quiet day, books and apples. I'm fed up with adventures." The others told him the same thing. "But first we must get rid of that Ugly Wuggly," said Gerald. "The Ugly Wuggly's real, don't make any mistake about that. And he became real inside that passage. If we could get him back there he might get changed again, and then we could take the coats and things back." "Isn't there any other way?" Kathleen asked, and Mabel said sharply, "I'm not going into that passage, afraid." "In broad daylight," Gerald sneered. "It isn't broad daylight in there," said Mabel. "Anyway," said Gerald, "we'll try to get him back, and shut the door. That's the most we can hope for. Now, we've just got to do it. And he's not terrible. He's real, you see. Come on." He took a hand of each girl, and they walked towards the bushes, behind which Jimmy and the Ugly Wuggly had been told to wait. When they were near the bushes, Jimmy came out into the sunlight. He was alone. "Where is it?" asked the girls in one breath. "Walking up and down in a walk," said Jimmy, "doing sums in a book. He says he's a broker. He's very rich, he's got a car, and a garden with a tennis court and a lake, and he goes to Greece for his holiday sometimes." He's building a public library for the people where he lives. The children passed the bushes and reached a grass walk surrounded by trees of different kinds. He's just round that corner, said Jimmy. He's simply rolling in money. He doesn't know what to do with it. I wish I was rich, I'd soon show him. Oh! cried Gerald. There, in the green shadows of the trees, Jimmy got his wish. He became rich. And the horrible thing was that though they could see what was happening, they could not stop it. The whole thing was over in a few seconds. Yet in those few seconds they saw him grow to a young man, a middle-aged man, and then, he turned into an elderly gentleman, who was looking down at them through spectacles and asking them the nearest way to the railway station. It was hard to believe that this stout, well-dressed elderly gentleman with the high hat was their own Jimmy. Oh, Jimmy, don't! cried Mabel. Gerald said, "This is awful," and Kathleen burst into tears. "Don't cry, little girl," said that which had been Jimmy, "and you, boy, can't you give an answer to a question? He doesn't know us," cried Kathleen. "Look here, Jimmy," said Gerald, "are you kidding? Because if you are, it's simply—" "My name is Mr. said that which had been Jimmy, and gave the name correctly, and I don't know you. By the way, it will perhaps be shorter to call this elderly stout person that short for that which had been Jimmy. What shall we do?" whispered Mabel in horror, and aloud she said, "Oh, Mr. James, please give me the ring." "Certainly not," said that firmly. "Will you tell me the way to the nearest railway station?" "No," said Gerald, "we won't." "Then," said that politely, though quite clearly angrily, "perhaps you'll tell me the way to the nearest lunatic asylum?" "Oh, no!" cried Kathleen. "You're not mad." "I'm not, but you are," said that. "If you're not mad, you're idiots. However, I see a gentleman ahead. I recognize him." And he walked towards the elderly Ugly Wuggly. Two elderly figures raised their hats, said a few words to each other, and walked side by side down the green walk, followed by three unhappy children. "He wished to be rich, so of course he is," said Gerald. "He'll have money for tickets and everything. And when the charm breaks, he'll find himself somewhere, perhaps in a really good hotel, and not know how he got there. Look here, you two must collect the coats and things. Hide them anywhere you like, and we'll carry them home tomorrow. I must stick to Jimmy. Go home to Mademoiselle and tell her Jimmy and I have gone off in the train and will be back to tea." And Gerald started to run after the Ugly Wuggly and that. He followed them to the station, listened at the ticket office to the voice of that who asked a ticket to London. When that and the Ugly Wuggly appeared on the platform, he bought a third return to London. The train arrived and everyone took their seats. "I don't understand," said Gerald, alone in his third-class carriage, "how railway trains and magic can be at the same time. And yet they do." Mabel and Kathleen found 6 heaps of coats, hats, skirts, gloves, golf clubs, hockey sticks, broom handles. They carried them up the hill to the stone dinosaur and put them in a hole in his stomach. Then they returned to school. Just as they were explaining to Mademoiselle that the boys had gone to London, a figure passed the window. It was the stranger who was coming back from the doctor's with antiseptic plaster on his cut. "Who's that?" suddenly asked Mademoiselle. The girls said that they had met him at Yalding Towers. After that, Mademoiselle didn't ask them any questions about the boys, and later went out for a walk. Kathleen and Mabel stayed at school, thinking of Gerald and Jimmy. Gerald was standing on the stairs of a London office building. On the floor below him was a door with a name Mr. U.W. Ugly, broker, and on the floor above was another door, on which was the name of Gerald's little brother, now elderly and very rich. There were no explaining words under Jimmy's name. When the door opened, Gerald saw a lot of clerks and mahogany desks. It was clear that had a large business, though Gerald couldn't guess what. What could Gerald do? It is almost impossible for a boy to enter a large London office and explain that the elderly and respected head of it is not what he seems, but is really your little brother, who had been made old and rich by a wishing ring. He couldn't knock at the door of Mr. U.W. Ugly and inform his clerks that their chief was just old clothes that had accidentally come alive and then became real. There was another difficulty. Gerald had had no dinner and was very hungry. At that moment a boy came up the stairs. He had in his hands a dark blue bag full of buns. If you get me buns too, I'll give you half a shilling, said Gerald. All right, give the money, quickly said the boy. Payment on delivery, said Gerald, using words which he had never thought to use. The boy looked at him in admiration and left. When he returned, Gerald gave the sixpence and took the buns. A minute later, the boy came out of Mr. U.W. Ugly's office. What sort of man's that? He asked. Big pot, said the boy. Very rich. Know anything about the one on the next floor? He's bigger than this one. Very old firm. These two have been rivals for years, said the boy. Look here. I'll give you 5 shillings if you help me. Go ahead, said the boy. I'm a private detective, said Gerald. That old man on the floor above, he's wanted police? Asked the boy. No relations. And I must get him to them, somehow. Now, if you could go in and give him a message from someone who wanted to meet him on business. I've got a better idea, said the boy. You go in and see old Ugly. He'd give his ears to have the old boy out of the way for a day or two. You're right, said Gerald. I'll try to do it. Here's your 5 shillings. He knocked at the door of Mr. U.W. Ugly. It opened and he entered. The boy went down a few steps and heard the voice of Mr. U.W. Ugly. He was saying, Then I'll ask him to let me look at the ring and I'll drop it. You pick it up. But remember, you don't know me. You're sure he's really unwell? Yes, said Gerald, he's quite mad about that ring. He'll follow it anywhere. I know he will. And think of his unhappy relations. I do, said Mr. Ugly kindly. That's all I think of course. He went up the stairs to the other office, and then that and Mr. Ugly went out to have lunch. The 2 boys followed. I say, said the boy, what are you up to? Well, I'll tell you, but you won't believe me. That old gentleman's not really old at all. He's my younger brother, who suddenly turned into what you see. The other's not real at all. He's only just old clothes and nothing inside. They were turned like that by a magic ring. There is no such thing as magic, said the boy. I learned that at school. All right, said Gerald. Goodbye. Oh, go ahead, said the boy. Well, if I can get that magic ring, I shall just wish we were all in a certain place. And we shall be. And then I will take care of them. Dad and Mr. Ugly entered a very expensive restaurant. Gerald was going to follow them. I say, "Are you really going into this place?" "Yes, I am." "You go, too. I'll pay for the lunch." The boy was the only person Gerald knew in London except that which had been Jimmy and the Ugly Wuggly, and he did not want to talk to them. What happened next happened so quickly that, as Gerald said later, it was just like magic. The restaurant was crowded. Gerald ordered 2 chops. Then at the next table he heard the words, "Ah, yes, a curious old family thing." That took off the ring and gave it to Mr. Ugly. And then the ring slipped from the hand of Mr. Ugly and fell on the floor. Gerald grasped the ring, put it on his finger, and cried out aloud in that crowded place, "I wish Jimmy and I were inside that door behind the statue of Flora." It was the only safe place he could think of. Gerald never knew what happened in that restaurant. There was nothing about it in the papers. He never knew what the boy did or thought. The lights and the sounds of the restaurant disappeared. Now there was darkness and silence around them. And through the darkness came a voice, and it was not the voice of that elderly man who had been Jimmy, but the voice of Jimmy, who was Gerald's little brother. The voice said, "Jerry, Jerry. I've had such an odd dream." "It's all right, Jimmy," he said, "it's not a dream now. It's that ring again. I had to wish us here, to get you back out of your dream." "Wish us where?" asked Jimmy. "Inside the passage, behind the Flora statue," said Gerald. "But how are we going to get out?" asked Jimmy. "Oh. I know. It isn't true. It's a dream." "Yes," said Gerald bravely, "it's just a dream, Jimmy. We'll just call out now and then, but it's really only a dream, of course." Chapter 9. When people are surrounded by magic, almost anything may happen. So it is not surprising that Mabel and Kathleen felt a strange, unreasonable, but quite strong wish to return to the Temple of Flora. And this explains how it was that when Gerald and Jimmy, holding hands in the darkness of the passage, called for help for the first time, and that call was at once answered from outside. Mabel and Kathleen opened the stone door, and the boys came out of the passage into the Temple of Flora. Then Gerald and Jimmy answered the questions of their sister and Mabel. "And you left that Ugly Wuggly in London," said Mabel, "though you could take him with you." "It's all right where it is," said Gerald, "I couldn't think of everything. And besides, no, thank you." "Look here," said Mabel, "let's just put the ring back in the treasure room. It's time to have done with it." So they went up to the castle, and the ring was put back among the odd ornaments that Mabel had once said were magic. "It doesn't look magic at all," said Gerald. "It's just like an old silly ring. I wonder if what Mabel said about the other things is true." "Let's try. I'd like to try," said Mabel, "only I don't remember what I said anything was." So had the others. Perhaps that was why, when they invented qualities for various rings and chains and brooches, nothing at all happened. "It's only the ring that's magic," said Mabel at last. "Oh, I say," she added, in quite a different voice. "What? I think the ring is not magic, but we know it is." "What ring?" "The wishing ring," said Kathleen. "The invisibility ring. Don't you see," said Mabel, opening her dark eyes very wide, "the ring is what you say it is? That's how it made us invisible. I just said it." "Oh, we can't leave it here. It is too valuable." "Say what it is." It's a wishing ring, said Jimmy. We've had that before, and you had your silly wish, said Mabel, more and more excited. I say it isn't a wishing ring. I say it's a ring that makes the person who wears it 4 yards high. She put the ring on her finger, and at the same moment she became indeed 4 yards high. Now you've done it, said Gerald, and he was right. Oh, Mabel, it was silly of you, said Kathleen. You didn't believe me when I said it was what I said it was, said Mabel, and I had to show it to you. What shall I do now? I should like to know. We must conceal you till you get normal, said Gerald. Practically yes, but where? Said Mabel. I'm afraid one of you will have to stay the night with me. I'm not going to be left alone, the silly height I am. Height was the right word. Mabel had said 4 yards high, and she was 4 yards high. But she was as thin as when her height was normal, so she looked, as Gerald said, like a nice worm. Her clothes had, of course, grown with her. She sat down suddenly on the floor. It's no use sitting there, said Gerald. I'm not sitting here, said Mabel. I only got down so as to be able to get through the door. I think I'll have to go on my hands and knees through most places. Look here, I must be out of doors before it gets dark. You can't. Someone will see you. No, I can creep on my front like a snake and hide in the bushes near the dinosaur, said Mabel, and we could have a picnic there. I'll write to Auntie. She'll give you the things for a picnic. So she wrote on a page from Gerald's notebook. Dearest Auntie, please may we have some things for a picnic? Gerald will bring them. I can't come myself, because I am a little tired. I think I have been growing rather fast. Your loving niece, Mabel. P.S. Lot of things, please, because some of us are very hungry. It was difficult, but possible, for Mabel to creep through the bushes. When Gerald returned with a basket, her long, pale face could be seen among the leaves, very near the ground. I look just like anybody else like this, don't I? She asked anxiously. All the rest of me is miles away, under different bushes. We've covered up the parts between the bushes with branches and leaves, said Kathleen. Don't move, Mabel, or you'll shake them off. Jimmy was unpacking the basket. He found there many good things: bread and butter, a bottle of milk, a bottle of water, cake and apples. It was a wonderful picnic. Everyone became happy and calm. A nice after-food peace filled the summer air. Even the stone dinosaur seemed peaceful and happy. I think he liked a good meal in his day, said Gerald. Who did? The dinosaur, said Gerald. He had a meal today, said Kathleen, and giggled. Yes, said Mabel, giggling also. What do you mean a meal? Jimmy asked suspiciously. Oh, don't be stupid, said Kathleen. We fed the dinosaur through the hole in his stomach with the clothes the ugly wugglies were made of. We can take them home with us, then, said Gerald. So that's all right. Look here, said Kathleen suddenly, I've got an idea. Let me have the ring. I'll give it back before we go. Oh, but you aren't going yet, said Mabel. She pulled off the ring. Kathleen took the ring and started to run towards the dinosaur, crying, Let's go and take the things now. Her idea was quite simple. She knew that a person who was not enchanted by the ring could rename it and change its powers. She wanted to say aloud, so that the others could not hear her, This is a wishing ring. It gives you any wish you choose. And she did say it. And no one heard her, except the birds. The way was uphill, it was sunny, and Kathleen had run fast. So when her brothers caught her at the dinosaur, she was very hot indeed and couldn't decide calmly what to wish. I'll get up and move the things down, because I know where I put them, she said. Gerald and Jimmy helped her to climb up, and she disappeared through the hole into the dark inside of the monster. Then she began to throw down clothes and sticks. I'm coming up to help you, said Gerald. Just as he got his shoulders through the opening, he heard Kathleen's boots on the floor of the dinosaurs inside, and Kathleen's voice, "It's so cool in here. Statues are always cool. I wish to be a statue." Oh. Though, was a cry of horror. What's up? Gerald asked. But in his heart he knew. He climbed up inside. In the little light that came up through the hole, he could see something white. He struck a match and saw the face of Kathleen, white, stony, and lifeless. Her hair was white, too, and her hands, clothes, shoes, everything was white, hard and cold. Kathleen had her wish, she was a marble statue. Gerald could not speak. It was too sudden, too terrible. Then he turned and spoke down out of that cold, stony silence to Jimmy, in the green, sunny live world outside. "Jimmy," he said, "Kathleen's gone and said that ring was a wishing ring." And so it was, of course. I see now what she was up to, running like that. And then she went and wished she was a statue, and she is? Asked Jimmy, below. Come up and have a look, said Gerald. And Jimmy came. She is really a statue, he said in horror. Come on, let's go and tell Mabel, said Gerald. The two boys returned and told her the news. Oh, how awful. What next? Said Mabel. She'll come all right, said Gerald, trying to be calm. Yes, but what about me? Asked Mabel. I haven't got the ring. And my time will be up before hers is. Could you get it off her hand? I'll put it back on her hand when I am normal again. I'm afraid the ring's turned to stone like her boots and all her clothes. But I'll go and see. Gerald got inside the dinosaur, struck a match and saw the dark ring on the white hand of the marble Kathleen. He pulled the ring, and, to his surprise, it slipped easily off the cold marble finger. I say, Kathy, I am sorry, he said. Then he thought that perhaps she could hear him. So he told the statue exactly what he and the others wanted to do. Then he returned to the others. Here's your ring, he said to Mabel. Now you're not frightened of anything, are you? No, said Mabel, in surprise. I'll stay here, but you must leave me all the coats, because it will be cold in the night. Then I shall be here when Kathleen comes out of the stone again. And you two go home and tell Mademoiselle that Kathleen's staying at the towers. But we don't know which of you will come right first. Anyhow, we'll say good night to Mademoiselle, and come and have a look at you before we go to bed, said Gerald. Mabel crept under the dinosaur, the boys covered her with coats and left. The sun had disappeared behind the black trees and the moon was rising. Mabel slept peacefully under the dinosaur. Inside the monster, Kathleen, alive in her marble, slept too. She had heard Gerald's words. She was the same Kathleen, only she was Kathleen in a case of marble that didn't let her move. Inside, the marble was not cold or hard, but warm and pleasantly safe. Everything was well. She had only to wait quietly and quite comfortably when she would come out of this stone case. so she waited calmly and then fell asleep. When she woke, she felt needles in feet, and her arms were tired. She rubbed her eyes and remembered. She had been a statue inside the stone dinosaur. Now I'm alive again, she said, and I'll get out of it. She sat down, put her feet through the hole, and realized that the dinosaur was moving. Oh, said Kathleen inside it is moonlight, and it's come alive, like Gerald said. It was indeed moving. Kathleen was afraid to jump out of it, because the beast was moving fast. They were going downhill. Then Kathleen heard a splash. They were close to water the lake. Kathleen dropped quickly out of the hole on the grass, ran sideways, and stood panting in the shadow of a statue's pedestal. A moment later the dinosaur slipped heavily into the water, and swam towards the central island. Be careful, little lady. I jump. The voice came from the pedestal, and next moment Phoebus had jumped from the pedestal. You are new, said Phoebus. I haven't seen you before. I am quite new, said Kathleen, and I didn't know you could talk. Why not? Phoebus laughed. You can talk, but I'm alive. Am I not? He asked. The white water calls me. I go. And he jumped into the water. Kathleen turned and went up the hill, towards the bushes. She must find Mabel, and they must go home at once. She found Mabel very quickly, because her long and worm-like form, covered with coats and trousers, could be easily seen in the moonlight. Kathleen touched her long cheek gently, and she woke. What's up? She said sleepily. It's only me, Kathleen explained. How cold your hands are, said Mabel. Wake up, said Kathleen, and let's talk. Can't we go home now? I'm awfully tired and hungry. You're too long to go home yet, said Kathleen sadly, and then Mabel remembered. She lay with closed eyes. Then she suddenly cried out, Oh, Kathy, I feel so funny. I'm getting shorter. I know, lamb. Mabel was really getting shorter. Her feet were near her long arms became shorter. Her face was no longer half a yard long. You are all right. Oh, I am so glad, cried Kathleen, and now we'll go home at once, dear. Go home? Said Mabel, slowly sitting up and looking at Kathleen with her big dark eyes. Go home like that, like what? Kathleen asked impatiently. Why, you, was Mabel's odd answer. I'm all right, said Kathleen. Come on, look at yourself, your hands, your dress, everything. Kathleen looked at her hands. They were of marble whiteness. Her dress, too, her shoes, her stockings, even the ends of her hair. She was white as snow. What is it? She asked, worried. Don't you see? You've not come right. You're a statue still. I'm not. I'm alive. I'm talking to you. I know you are, darling, said Mabel kindly. That's because it's moonlight, but you can see I'm alive. Of course I can. I've got the ring, said Mabel, taking her marble hand. It's moonlight, and you're a statue, and you've just come alive with all the other statues. And when the moon goes down, you'll just be a statue again. By the way, where's the dinosaur? In his bath, said Kathleen, and so are all the other stone beasts. Well, said Mabel, trying to look on the bright side of things, that's good news. Chapter 10. I've got an idea, said Mabel. We may find out a lot about this magic place, if the other statues aren't too proud to talk to us. They aren't, said Kathleen, at least, Phoebus wasn't. He was very polite and nice. Where is he? Mabel asked. He was in the lake, said Kathleen. Then let's go down there, said Mabel. She jumped up, but the white Kathleen did not move. Hello, little sister, said a voice behind them. They turned their heads, surprised. There in the moonlight stood Phoebus, smiling at them, very friendly. Oh, it's you, said Kathleen. Yes, said Phoebus cheerfully. Who is your friend, child? This is Mabel, said Kathleen. Mabel got up and bowed, hesitated, and held out a hand. I'm happy to meet you, little lady, said Phoebus, taking her marble fingers. But I don't understand how you can see us, and why you do not fear. Mabel showed him the ring. I see, said Phoebus, but if you have that, why not become a statue and swim with us in the lake? I can't swim, said Mabel. Nor yet me, said Kathleen. You can, said Phoebus. All statues that come to life are good at all sports. And you, little lady, wish yourself a statue and join us. You see, said Mabel, this ring. You wish for things, and you never know how long they're going to last. It would be jolly to be a statue now, but not next morning. You don't know the powers of your ring, said Phoebus. Wish exactly, and the ring will exactly perform. Say this: I wish to be a statue of living marble till the dawn. Oh, yes, do, Mabel, it would be so jolly, cried Kathleen. And could I swim then, swim and laugh, and eat the food of the gods, and listen to a beautiful song. Oh, Mabel, do, said Kathleen. I am so hungry. Still Mabel hesitated. Then she looked at Kathleen's legs, and suddenly said, Very well, I will. But first I'll take off my shoes and stockings. Marble boots look simply awful. She had pulled off shoes and stockings, then she said the wish, and there were two little live statues in the moonlight. Tall Phoebus took a hand of each. Come, run, he cried. And they ran. They ran down the slope to the lake and jumped into the water. They swam easily and beautifully. And it was so lovely there. The moon was high in the sky. The willows, water lilies, temples, terraces, and bushes made the place very romantic. Now one more round, said Phoebus kindly, and then we'll swim to the island. The island was bigger than it seemed, and it was covered with trees and bushes. But when they passed the trees, they saw a wide lawn, and then marble steps going down to a round pool, where there were no water lilies, only gold and silver fish. And the water and marble and grass was lighted with a clear, white light, 7 times stronger than the whitest moonlight, and in the waters of the pool 7 moons reflected. The girls looked up at the sky, almost expecting to see 7 moons there. But no, the old moon was alone there. There are 7 moons, said Mabel. Of course, said Phoebus, everything in our world is 70s, as much so as in yours. Now let's join the ladies. On the other side of the pool, there were 20 or 30 figures, all statues, and all alive. Some were dipping their white feet among the gold and silver fish. Others were holding hands and dancing in a ring. I bring 2 guests, said Phoebus, coming up to the group. The statues crowded round, stroking the girl's hair. Are the wreaths ready, Hebe? The tallest lady asked. Make 2 more. And almost directly, Hebe came down the steps with rose wreaths on her arms. There was one for each marble head. The children remembered how Mademoiselle had said that gods and goddesses always wore wreaths for meals. Hebe herself put the roses on the girls' heads, and Aphrodite took them by the hands and said, come, we must get the feast ready. Arrow Psyche Hebe, all you young people can get the fruit. I don't see any fruit, said Kathleen. You must pick it like this, said Psyche, lifting her marble arms to a willow branch. She showed her hand to the children, it held a pear. I see, said Mabel, she touched the willow branch and they saw a big peach in her hand. Yes, just that, laughed Psyche, who was a dear, as anyone could see. After this they gathered fruit into a few silver baskets, while the elder statues were busy getting golden glasses and jugs and dishes from the branches of other trees, and filling them with everything nice to eat and drink. Then everyone sat or lay down on the steps, and the feast began. I wonder what the boys are doing, said Mabel, taking the third peach. At this moment, said Hermes, who had just returned from the flight, at this moment they are trying to find you near the home of the dinosaur. They're very worried about you. Kathleen stood up. Thank you all very much, she said. It was very kind of you to have us, and we've enjoyed ourselves very much, but I think it's time to go now. If you are worried about your brothers, said Phoebus, they can easily join you. Give me your ring for a moment. He took it from Kathleen's half-reluctant hand, dipped it in the reflection of one of the 7 moons, and gave it back. Now, he said, say what Mabel wished for herself. Say. I know, and Kathleen made her wish. You were too quick, said Phoebus. They are statues now, but they are not here. Hermes, bring them here and explain things as you come. He dipped the ring again in one of the reflected moons, and gave it back to Kathleen. Now it's clean and ready for the next magic. It was clear that Hermes had explained everything quite fully, because when Marble Gerald and Jimmy arrived, they were quite at ease. They bowed to the goddesses, and took their places beside them. When the feast was over, Hera turned her eyes on the children and said, How did the ring come into your hands? I'll tell you, said Mabel. Once upon a time there was a little girl, called Mabel, she added, and went on with story of the Enchanted Castle. The marble gods listened, almost as enchanted as the castle itself. And so, ended, Kathleen wished for the boys, and the Lord Hermes brought them, and here we all are. The statues began discussing the story. When the discussion was over, Mabel said, Now we want to know something. What? How you come alive, and how you know about the ring. Tell them, Phoebus, said Aphrodite. So Phoebus told. All statues, he said, can come alive when the moon shines. But only on one night and all the year people can see them. And when is that? Gerald asked, politely. At the festival of the harvest, said Phoebes, and it can happen only in certain temples. One of these temples is in this great garden. Then, said Gerald, much interested, if we come up to that temple on that night, we could see you, even if we are not statues or don't have the ring? Even so, said Phoebus, more, we must answer any question asked by people, and the night is when, said Phoebus, and laughed. Wouldn't you like to know? Then the great marble Zeus stroked his long beard, and said, Enough of stories, Phoebus. Play to us. But the ring, said Mabel in a whisper, how you know all about the ring, ask me again, before dawn, and I will tell you all I know of it, the god whispered back. Then Phoebus began to play the lyre, and music filled the air. It was so sweet and beautiful that those who listened forgot time and space. And then, suddenly, the music stopped. Phoebus stood up, crying, The dawn! To your pedestals, O God! Chapter 11. Because they were in the circle of the real magic, where all things are understood without speech. All the stone creatures gathered round the stone. Then all the faces turned upward and cried one word, the light. And the sound of their voice was like the sound of a great wave. And then the light disappeared, and with it disappeared all the stone figures. "I want to go to the cave on the island," said the French girl. Very quietly they went down to the boathouse, crossed the lake in a boat and came to the island. Then they found the steps. They went down into the Hall of Psyche. "It was the Hall of Granted Wishes, the ring," said Lord Yalding. "The ring," said his lover, "is the magic ring given long ago to people, and it is what you say it is. A lady of my house gave it to your ancestor and asked him to build her a garden and a house like her own palace and garden in her own land. This place is built partly by his love and partly by that magic. She never lived to see it, that was the price of the magic. Only one wish is left now." Her voice went on. "Shall I wish?" "Yes, wish," they said, all of them. "I wish, then," said Lord Yalding's lover, "that all the magic this ring has done may be undone, and that the ring itself may be just a symbol of our love." As soon as she said these words, the enchanted light and the windows of Granted Wishes disappeared. And where Psyche's statue had been was a stone. "It is her grave," the girl said. Next day no one could remember anything at all exactly. But many things were changed. When Mademoiselle woke in her own bed in the morning, she had in her hand not the magic ring, but the plain gold ring. Later it was used in the wedding ceremony. More than half the jewels in the paneled room were gone, and those that remained lay just on the shelves. There was no passage at the back of the Temple of Flora. Quite a lot of the secret passages and hidden rooms had disappeared. And there were fewer statues in the garden. However, the jewels that were left were quite enough to pay for everything. All the ring magic was undone so suddenly that it was difficult to believe that any magic had ever happened. But how then could you explain the paragraph, which appeared in the evening papers the day after the magic of the moon rising? "Mysterious disappearance of a well-known businessman, Mr. U.W. Ugly," the papers said, "had remained late, working at his office. When in the morning the office door was opened, the police found the clothes of this gentleman on the floor, together with an umbrella, a walking stick and a golf club. His body was not found.